I'm going to now move in to the scrolls in the New Testament. This is material, some of this you've not seen before. I think you're going to find this very, very interesting. You see, these are not Christian scrolls. These are Jewish scrolls. Now, we've seen tonight that the Dead Sea Scrolls were discovered at Qumran mainly. We've talked about the great Isaiah scroll, the most famous of all the scrolls. We've surveyed cave number 4 and the 700 scrolls found there. We've also talked a little bit about the people who lived at Qumran. Let's talk a little bit more about this community. You see, here we have the only archaeological site in Israel where we have manuscripts as well. What do we know about this community? Qumran is the only site in ancient Israel which yielded manuscripts from the Second Temple period. I need to mention that a lot of people don't know this. The archaeology and the scrolls can be studied together. Not so with a lot of archaeology. Here we have actual archaeology and scrolls. Father DeVoe, a famous figure, excavated Qumran back in the 1950s. How in the desert do you get water? I used to live in Arizona. One of the big problems in Arizona is where do you get water? And they bring it in from the north, do they not? Well, at Qumran, they didn't have any Canada to the north. They didn't have machines. They didn't have hydraulic pumps or even dams. How do you bring water to a community? We have the most amazing system of water channels found at Qumran. They needed water, and they needed a lot of it. Here we see the huge cisterns that had water year-round, not only to drink, not only to sustain themselves, but they practiced baptism. Here is a mikvah, a very interesting mikvah. You know, when I first showed this slide, one person said, "Isn't that a pity? The stairs got broken." Well, my friends, this is a wonderful picture because frozen in time, we have an event. You see, Josephus tells us in 31 BC, there was a huge earthquake in Judea. We believe that split in the stairs was caused by that earthquake. This is 31 BC, this picture. We have stairs leading down into a pool. And in fact, we now know that at Qumran, they didn't only have ritual washing, they even had baptism for the forgiveness of sins. Here is a very important verse from the community rule. No one may enter the water unless he has repented of his evil, because uncleanness clings to all transgressors of his word. Baptism for the forgiveness of sin. Now, you may wonder, who baptized them? Was it someone like John the Baptist? Someone like Jesus? Well, it's very interesting. You see, at Qumran, no one baptized them. The sinner would go down the stairs and plunge himself into the water, and he would rise from the water clean from his sins. And if you look very carefully in this slide, we actually have some rather strange rods or bars going down. You can see them. They look like handles. The idea is you had a left lane and a right lane, something like the escalator at an airport, one way and another way. And the idea is that the sinner would go down on the one side, plunge himself into the waters of cleansing. He would emerge and go up by the other set of stairs. Isn't that interesting? The idea of baptism for the forgiveness of sins. We also have a graveyard. Much could be said about the graveyard. I can tell you one thing, that the people were buried facing to the east so that on the resurrection day they would awaken to see the sunrise. We have the room where scrolls were copied. As I've mentioned already, we have the very means of production. So the archaeology is very, very interesting. Now I will proceed to say more about the non-Bible scrolls, which are very, very relevant for understanding Christian origins and messianic elements. How do the non-Bible scrolls relate to our understanding of Judaism and Christianity? Well, they record the ideas and outlook of the Qumran community. So what was their idea? What was their theology? What did they believe with respect to life and the afterlife and many issues? Well, here is one of them called the community rule. The community rule. Now, I've always had a problem explaining what this is. You see, this would be easy if I was at Notre Dame. Have you heard of the rule of Saint Benedict? You see, Catholics are very used to monasteries, and they have a rule book called the Rule of Saint Benedict, or the Rule of Saint Francis. Well, this community rule means it is like the rule book for the community. Here we have the first monastery in the Western world. Now you might say, I didn't know Jews had monasteries. Yes, no less a person than Magen Broshe, the first curator of the Dead Sea Scrolls, said this is the first monasteries. Here was a group of Jews living out in the desert waiting for the end of the world, waiting for the Messiah. And this was their book of rules. Very interesting. Calendars. I could tell you so much about calendars. Did you know that in the Hebrew Bible there are two calendars at work? There is the lunar calendar of 28 days, and there's the solar calendar of 30 days. These two calendars are seen in the Hebrew Bible. And sometimes when there's been a contradiction in the text, it's actually two Bibles at work. At Qumran, they believed that the Jews of their time had got it wrong by taking on the lunar calendar from the Babylonians. They maintained that the true calendar was the solar calendar, and in fact, they may be right. There's evidence in the earlier scriptures that Jews practiced the solar calendar. It was in Babylon that they received the other one. And in fact, it's an important issue because the one who has the calendar sets the festivals, and the one that sets the festivals controls the religion. They believed that other Jews were out of fellowship with God through the wrong calendar. In fact, there's a lovely story. The high priest at Qumran, it was on the Day of Atonement, Yom Kippur, a very sacred day. It is said that the other high priest in Jerusalem came to visit him on that day. In other words, he tried to mess up his Yom Kippur. If I may use an analogy, let's say the Greek Orthodox guy, let's say you were angry with the Greek Orthodox person, and you know they have Christmas 10 days later than the other Christians. You know this, right? Let's just say you wanted to really upset the bishop, and you sent a very important person to visit him on his Christmas. That happened at Qumran. That in fact, that they were disturbed, what they call the wicked priest coming to visit them on a crucial time. I'm being a bit involved now, but calendars is a very big issue in the scrolls. The copper scroll, the only document that is written on copper from the ancient world, talks about buried treasure enough to make us rich. How does this impact our understanding of the New Testament? The Dead Sea Scrolls are essential reading. I'm going to maintain to you tonight that the Dead Sea Scrolls are essential reading for a number of issues. Number one, the Dead Sea Scrolls are essential reading for our understanding of the Old Testament scripture in the New Testament. Okay? The use of the Old Testament in the New. Now, we've already seen that the three favorite books in the New Testament were Deuteronomy, Isaiah, and the Psalms, and they were among the first four at Qumran. Remember, we've got at Qumran, number 4, Isaiah, number 2, Deuteronomy, number 1, the Psalms. Let's talk about Deuteronomy first. Let me do that. What was the reason why the early Christians quoted Deuteronomy so much, and why the people at Qumran, the Essenes, the Yachad, why did they love the book of Deuteronomy? There's a key word. It's Moses, it's the law, but there's a key word, and this is it: covenant. You see, for the Christians, Jesus takes the bread and the wine. He says, "This is my blood of the new covenant." Did you know that the people of Qumran, they didn't call themselves Essenes, they didn't even call themselves Jews? What was their name for themselves? Well, one of their names was the Sons of Light, right? But their other name was the Community of the New Covenant. Wow, there is an amazing hit with the New Testament. Both were bringing in a new covenant. Number two, the book of Isaiah. Why is Isaiah so prominent at Qumran and in the New Testament? In other words, we're looking at a sort of parallel convergence. Why is Isaiah so important for the Yachad and in the New Testament? The key word is Messiah. Yes. Messianic. Here were Jews, Messianic Jews, living out in the desert, waiting for the end of time. They were not Yeshua, they weren't Christian Messianic Jews, but they believed, in fact, in two Messiahs. Very interesting. Now, the book of Psalms. Why was the book of Psalms so big in the New Testament and at Qumran? What's the key word? And I battled with this because the Psalms is so rich, right? Psalms is about prayer and praise and kingship, is it not? Messianic. The key word is David. You get it? It took me 5 years, and one of my students said, "Dr. Flint, see, I used to say the Psalms, there's two words. There is Messiah and there's prayer." And my student said, "Dr. Flint, I've got it. It's David." See that? The word that brings it together. This is very important. The same books. Look at there. We have the commentary on Nahum. We have the first commentaries ever written in the Dead Sea Scrolls. They loved Scripture. The book of Enoch. Some of you may know that the book of Jude quotes from the prophet Enoch. Enoch was a big book at Qumran. Very popular, very important. Some even think that it was a sort of Enochic Judaism found among the Yachad. Now let's talk about essential reading for New Testament messianic expectation. These here were Jews living out in the desert before the Christians. They expected Messiah, and in fact they expected more than one Messiah. Here we have the community rule that's come up a lot. Let's take this key verse. In the wilderness, prepare the way of the Lord. Make straight in the desert a highway for our God. Right? You know John the Baptist is connected with that verse. Well, here was a group in the desert, quoting from Isaiah, in the wilderness, prepare the way of the Lord, waiting for the Messiah. They did not accept Jesus as the Messiah. Actually, they had other Messiahs, but the idea of a common messianic expectation. Let me share with you a powerful reading from the Psalms. Someone here tonight told me they love the Psalms. Well, listen to this. Here's a very controversial reading. If you go to the King James, there's a reading in the book of Psalms that is very important. I've checked this out when I was working on the Psalm scrolls. I went to the Rockefeller Museum, into the basement, to check on the Psalm scrolls, and I found something very interesting. Folks, I did my Ph.D. on the Psalms, and there I am some years ago as a younger man. I'm holding in my hands the oldest copy of the book of Psalms in the world, 150 BCE. I've often been asked, what was it like to touch the Psalm scroll? My friends, it's like reaching out and touching the very hand of God. It is a mystical experience. And you know, when we professors get old and we're in a small room, maybe with our wives, right? And our kids get rid of all our books. That's what professors all fear. And I'm going to say to my grandchildren, I want to tell you something. In my life, I touched the Psalm scroll. It is that precious. Well, I didn't just show you this tonight to show you a scroll. There's powerful message in these. Psalm 22 says this. It's a very famous psalm. You know this. My God, why have you forsaken me? It's quoted in the New Testament more than any other psalm. They've cast lots for my clothing. Now, in verse 10, it says this in the King James, "Dogs have surrounded me, a pack of evil ones closes in on me. They have pierced my hands and feet." Now, many Christians have said, well, that's quite obvious. That's a picture of the crucifixion. And you might say that's good, but you would be shocked to find that your Bible does not say that. If you go to the Masoretic text, we have a different word. We have ka'ari. A pack of evil ones closes in on me like a lion on my hands and feet. And if you were to ask many people, why does the King James say they have pierced my hands and feet? They would say, because they're trying to Christianize that psalm. They are cheating, they're changing the difficult reading like a lion on my hands and feet. So my friends, this is a crucial reading. Does Psalm 22 say, they have pierced my hands and feet, or does it say like a lion? I've checked this out. There's only one scroll that has this reading. In fact, there are 3 scrolls, a new one just came to light. There are 3 scrolls that have Psalm 22. But there's only one scroll, the Psalm scroll from Nachal Chever. And I've checked it out personally. And when you turn to the relevant verse, what do we find? There it is, ka'aru. They have pierced my hands and feet. I have just shared with you dynamite. I've shared with you a reading that generations of scholars have said had been changed to they have pierced my hands and feet. Now we get the most ancient copy of this psalm, and what does it say? They have pierced my hands and feet. And it's back in most modern Bibles. So the King James got it right. They didn't have the scrolls. But folks, this is a very, very important reading. And if you go on the internet, you will find there's a lot of discussion about it. Now, the Dead Sea Scrolls are essential for understanding Jesus, a messianic Son of God in the scrolls. Right? So when I went to study at university, I was told, the idea of a messianic Son of God is something late. This is not from Judaism. In Luke 1, the angel says to Mary, he will be great. He will be called the Son of the Most High. And at the end, he will be called the Son of God. The idea would be that this is a Christianizing later addition, that the Jews don't talk about a messianic Son of God. Well, we now have a scroll from Qumran written in Aramaic. It's not a biblical scroll. It talks about a coming figure, a messianic figure, and it has that same language. He will be called the Son of God. They will call him the Son of the Most High. It's just a one-line coincidence, but the idea of a messianic Son of God is known in Judaism, but had been lost to us. What about, did Jesus claim to be the Messiah? Did Jesus claim to be the Messiah? Now you might say, oh please, doesn't this guy know anything? Well folks, if you look in the New Testament, Jesus very seldom says, I am the Messiah. I'm going to take you to Luke. He comes to Nazareth and he turns to the book of Isaiah, and it says here, the Spirit of the Lord is upon me because he has anointed me. Now I have a number of bullets. He's anointed me to bring good news to the poor. He's anointed me, sent me to proclaim release to the captives, recovery of sight to the blind, to let the oppressed go free, to proclaim the year of the Lord's favor. And so we are told in Luke that when he read this, everybody was just amazed. And Christians have always said, well, Jesus is claiming to be Messiah. I was quite shocked when I was in Ph.D. studies and I had professors saying, that's not possible. Jesus never claimed to be Messiah. Luke made it up and put it in his mouth. Well, now we have a scroll called the Messianic Apocalypse from K4, 4Q 521. And this is not a biblical scroll. It's BCE. It's not a Christian scroll. And it uses the word Messiah. Heaven and earth will listen to his Messiah. And it gives you a number of things that are going to happen when the Messiah comes. All right, setting the captives free, opening the eyes of the blind, raising up the oppressed. And what this all is boiling down to is that if you study this in contrast to Luke, Jesus is drawing on a tradition that's already there. It's not the church making it up. Jesus is claiming to be Messiah because we have a number of hits that correspond between Luke and this scroll, and the word Messiah is used. We've got the clear claim to be messianic on the part of Jesus. It's not the church making it up. Now you might say, what does it all mean? Well, Jesus is claiming to be a prophetic Messiah. That's what's happening in Luke 4. Jesus is saying, I am a prophetic Messiah. Now you might say, okay, I know a lot of people who accept that, but there's one part that I don't like, this idea of the dead being raised. Dan Brown and others would say in the Da Vinci Code, this has all been made up. Please, Jews never talked about the dead being raised, right? And the idea is controversial. If you look in Luke, Jesus doesn't only say the blind receive their sight. This is Luke 7, and John the Baptist wants to know, are you the Messiah? And he says, tell John what you've seen. The blind receive their sight, the lame walk, the lepers are cleansed, the deaf hear, the dead people are being raised, the poor have got good news brought to them. And blessed is anyone who takes no offense. So Jesus is saying, look at these things that have happened. You want to know if I'm the Messiah? And the difficulty is, scholars would say, we have no evidence that Jews were talking like that. Well, I'll go back to the same scroll. See, some scholars say resurrection's not found. And there's lots of them who think that way, especially New Testament scholars. Let's go back to our scroll, because it not only talks about what we've said already, it says he will heal the wounded, he will revive the dead, he will bring good news to the poor. My friends, this is an explosive scroll. This is the most important scroll relating to Messianism. It affirms what Luke is claiming about Jesus. Do you know about the works of the law? If you've looked at Paul in the New Testament, there's actually a really difficult section where Paul uses a term, works of the law. Right? Again and again, he brings up this works of the law. Modern Bibles change it to deeds of the law. What is he saying? Well, Paul says, by the works of the law, no human being will be justified, since through the law comes knowledge of sin. It's to do with the relationship between the New Testament church and Judaism. We hold that no one is justified by faith apart from the works of the law. Do you need to practice halakha and halachot as a Christian? What is this about? Then Paul goes on to say in Galatians, all who rely on the works of the law are under a curse. It is written, cursed be anyone who does not abide by all things in the law and do them. Now this is known to us. Now some would say this is quite simple. Paul is proclaiming the gospel of grace, which is by faith in Jesus Christ, against Judaism, which is based on the works of the law. And many have come up with all sorts of ideas, even anti-Semitism with thinking like that. But let's look at this again. However, there are examples in the Hebrew Bible of people being saved by God's grace. Of course there are. There are many passages in the scriptures. The Lord passed before Moses and he said, the Lord, a God merciful and gracious, slow to anger, abounding in steadfast love. We have many references to the grace, the mercy of God in the scriptures. So the idea of Judaism being a religion of works only seems to miss the point. What is Paul really trying to say in Romans and Galatians? Well, we now have a very interesting text from Qumran called 4QMMT, a Miskat Maaseh HaTorah, some of the works of the law. So that's the Hebrew in English. 4QMMT is a document that has Miksad Maaseh HaTorah, or some of the precepts of Torah. So this is very interesting. What about the law? It's 3 sections. It has a 364-day solar calendar. According to this document, a true believer has to follow this calendar, the longer calendar. And then there are 24 religious laws or halachot and an epilogue on the separation of the group from those who disagree. So this is who are the true Jews. That's what this is all about. Works of the law, it turns out, is only found in this document and in Paul. If you take a search of ancient literature, the works of the law is a unique term that's found in Romans, Galatians, and MMT, nowhere else. Why is this? We have written to you some of the works of the law, those which we determined would be beneficial for you and your people. And it will be reckoned to you as righteousness in that you have done what is right and good before him to your own benefit and to that of Israel. So the idea of works of the law is an Essene or a Qumranic type doctrine. And so we now think, scholars now believe that works of the law is found elsewhere only at Qumran. Because of that, in the passages from Romans and Galatians, Paul is really arguing against Essene Jews or Christians who've been influenced by their teachings. In other words, Paul is not condemning Judaism as such. It's a certain flavor of Judaism. It is Essene Judaism. So the idea that we need to remember that Qumran is in the background of much of the New Testament if we want to understand it properly. I'm going to have to come to a close. The last one as we close. The Battle of Armageddon. Right? Battle of Armageddon. We've heard so much about this in the book of Revelation. They came to the place that is in Hebrew called Armageddon. That's all we get in Revelation. And yet there have been movies about the final battle at the end of time. Well, did you know that we now have a whole scroll? In fact, there's several copies of it about the eschatological battle at the end of time. It's called the war scroll between the sons of light and the sons of darkness. Very important scroll. It is the battle of Armageddon. The sons of light and the forces of darkness will fight together to show the strength of God with the roar of a great multitude and the shouts of gods and men. A day of disaster. This is a quotation from the scroll. The two sides are tied at 3 rounds each. In 3 rounds, the sons of light will stand firm so as to strike a blow at wickedness. And 3 rounds, the army of Belial, the devil, will strengthen themselves so as to force the retreat of the sons of light. See, here we have a great contest in 7 rounds. They are tied at 3 each. And now we come to the final battle, the Battle of Armageddon, in the war scroll. And folks, we even have archaeological evidence that confirms that there was a battle tower found at Qumran. Arrowheads were found there. On a day in 68 CE, the Romans attacked. The sons of light gathered in their white robes. They took up their weapons. They waited for the angels from heaven to join them to defeat the sons of darkness. Their dream did not come true. The Romans destroyed them. The idea of the eschatological battle remains true. Their Messiah, their interpretation turned out not to work. But this gives strong confirmation to what is happening in the book of Revelation. I have much to say about the New Jerusalem. I can't tell you about this now. There's a New Jerusalem scroll. Let me come to the end. So I've said enough. Pastor, do we have time for a few minutes of questions?
Sure. Yeah.
Thank you, everybody.
Give him a big hand. Any questions? Any questions?
Yes, at the back.
You talked about Enoch. Why wouldn't that be in the Bible?
Enoch is mentioned in the book of Jude. There was a book of Enoch that was very influential at Qumran and among some Jews and the early Christians. But as they looked at Enoch, it became very, very controversial. And quite early on, the rabbis rejected Enoch and the early church rejected Enoch. However, there's one church to this very day that uses the book of Enoch in their Bible. They're called the Ethiopian Church. Enoch was very influential, and at Qumran, it's a book that needs to be studied. It's very apocalyptic, very controversial. There was a question here.
Yes, when I see the pictures of the Dead Sea Scrolls, there's lots of separation.
Yes. The Dead Sea.
There's a lot of separation. And I wonder, who interprets the missing between the Hebrew writings,
yes,
where you have a lot of blanks? Now, I've heard there's been many different people interpreting that, and some of them say that some of the interpretations aren't necessarily correct. There's been a lot of things read into the interpretations.
Absolutely.
So I was just wondering what your remarks about that.
There's about 1,000 Dead Sea Scrolls. Now, 230 of them are Bible. So the idea is if you've got 1,000 jigsaw puzzles where the jigsaws, a lot of it's lost, for some of them we've got the box top cover. If it's Bible, we've got the cover. If it says the Lord's my shepherd and it says goodness and mercy will follow me all the days of my life, and we are careful, we can reconstruct a lot of the Bible scrolls. The non-Bible scrolls are much more difficult. And so, yes, there are gaps. Fortunately, some scrolls are found in many copies. So I showed you scraps, do you remember? One person said, these aren't the Dead Sea Scrolls, these are the Dead Sea scraps. But we have over 20 copies of Genesis. We have over 30 copies of Deuteronomy. And so when we made the Dead Sea Scrolls Bible, we put it all together. So because we have multiple copies of many books, we can find extant text. Some reconstruction is necessary, and that's why scholars have to do this work. We use concordances. We have to be very careful. We look at rabbinic literature. Sometimes we have to leave gaps. But by and large, I think the reconstructions are considered very reasonable and often very accurate. This work is ongoing.
Based on your research, between the different sects that made up the full Sanhedrin, how were those at Qumran received by the full Sanhedrin?
Yes, the Sons of Light at Qumran, they believed that the Jerusalem establishment were the sons of darkness. They believed that the Pharisees and the Sadducees had strayed from the way, and they were not true Jews. They believed that at the end times they would be destroyed with the Gentiles. So they were opposed to the Jerusalem temple. They were opposed to the Sanhedrin and so on. They believed they were the remnant, and that's why they were in the wilderness preparing the way of the Lord. Right, time for just one or two more. Yes.
Okay. When you were referring to Psalm 22, you'd mentioned that particular term, piercing his hands and feet or his feet, was that found in all three of those Psalm 22 scrolls?
We only have 3 manuscripts total that contain Psalm 22. One of them, in fact, has just been purchased by Southwestern College. It came to light recently. They are fragmentary, and there's only 2 of them that have a bit of the relevant verse. And the actual wording we're looking for, they have pierced, or something, my hands and feet, is only found in the one scroll. So yes, the only scroll we have from antiquity that has that section does not say like a lion on my hands and feet. It says they have pierced my hands and feet, which means that the earliest evidence says they have pierced my hands and feet. It's more likely that the guys who've got like a lion changed it than the other way around.
I have a quick question. How would the Karaites be viewed compared to the Essenes?
Yes, the Karaites are a sect or a group of Judaism who have a very famous synagogue in Cairo. And in fact, about 100 years ago, a very interesting document was found at the Cairo synagogue called the Cairo Geniza. And it contained what is called the Damascus document that contained a different sort of Judaism. And when the Dead Sea Scrolls were discovered years later, the Damascus document was also found. And that's why many scholars thought, obviously, at Qumran, these scrolls are related to the Karaites. In fact, many felt that the caves contained medieval copies put there by the Karaites in the Middle Ages. And that's why they were arguing, because of the Damascus document from the Cairo Geniza. Now we have found, no, the Damascus document at Cairo came much later, that in fact the original documents were at Qumran. The Karaites are a sort of a type of Judaism that survived underground, you could say, and they preserved some of the traditions that have been lost to other Judaism, just as Enoch was kept by the Ethiopian church. So it's a different type of Judaism that exists in Israel today. It's a very small amount of Jews.
Yeah. Have you had a chance to look into the recently found Jordan-led codices?
The Jordan codices I would treat with great caution. They're probably a fake.
Recently, I've heard they're finding a lot of evidence that it's not a fake. I heard.
Well, I do know this, and I'm not an expert. I do know they have been known for many years to the Israelis, and they have known about them for a long time. And I was told that they have see this as a fake, but I may be wrong. I have not studied them personally.
All right, thank you.
Okay, what do you think of Dr. Flint?
Right.
Let's get